Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Having gone through a difficult phase now, Pakistan's economy seems to be on a track of fast recovery. We have seen a continuous bullish trend at the Pakistan Stock Exchange. It has hit a new peak of above 56,500 level as well. Also, we have seen FBR has achieved revenue collection target for the fourth consecutive month with a 43% in domestic and 37% overall growth. We have also seen that Pakistan's authorities had to take some difficult and tough decisions after the standby arrangement with the IMF for the economic stabilization in the country. We've also seen in regard to that since the IMF review mission led by its mission chief, Mr. Nathan Porter, is here in Pakistan to discuss the economic performance of the Pakistani authorities, especially in the first quarter of this fiscal year. There have been remarks by Mr. Nathan Porter appreciating Pakistan's authorities' efforts in this regard for the economic stabilization in the country. We had also seen that these talks were underway since November the 2nd. The technical level talks concluded earlier on Friday, and now as we speak, the policy level talks between Pakistani authorities and the IMF review mission are underway. We have also seen a caretaker Prime Minister, Mr. Anwarul Haq Kakar, has directed the concerned authorities to formulate a comprehensive strategy to improve FBR's performance, saying revenue collection was the backbone for national economy. So we'll be taking up for discussion all these developments on the economic front. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Ali Salman. He is Executive Director at the Policy Research Institute of Market Economy. Mr. Ali, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Abbas Moosvi, Research Fellow at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Dr. Abbas, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, Mr. Ali, let's begin with this particular bullish trend. We have seen a continuous bullish trend at the Pakistan Stock Exchange, also breaking the psychological barrier, now has hit a new level of 56,500 points. The major factors, what do you think have contributed to this continuous bullish trend?
Well, Pakistan Stock Exchange and the movement in the index represents the level of expected optimism or expected pessimism of the stock market investors. They represent a rather minority of our investors base in the country. Having said that, of course, when you see a bullish trend in the stock market, it's driven by an expectation of greater level of certainty in the market. Also, when we talk about the dollar-rupee parity, they are expecting that this will be working in their favor. They would expect greater dividends on their stocks. So these factors are normally affecting the expectation on performance. But since we have the IMF team in the capital, and generally the numbers which have been quoted from at least the government sources seem to be supportive, and the expectation is that we will pass the IMF review mission, and the second tranche of the SBA would be released, adding the forex reserve. So these are all the factors which are helping the bullish trend in the stock market.
Right. Dr. Moosvi, what's your understanding regarding this particular bullish trend? Overall, largely, we see a positive sentiment that now prevails after some significant measures which have been taken by the authorities in order to stabilize the economy overall.
No, thank you so much for having me again. I want to start off by talking about the fact that economic cycles come in ebbs and flows. So when you see a bullish trend, it will inevitably be followed by a trend that is not so bullish in the near future, right? And that's just part and parcel of how economies function around the globe. That's how they function by their very design. I think that in terms of the stock exchange in particular, we at PIDE have done this study on the Pakistan Stock Exchange top 100 list of companies, the PSX as they call it. What we found was that within the executive boards of each of these companies, we looked at where these individuals are originating, what their backgrounds are, and so on and so forth. And what we found was that all of these individuals occupying the executive boards of these companies originated in 31 primary families, right? So there seems to be a certain capture of this domain by elites, by certain families, by certain bureaucratic background people, and so on and so forth. And I think in order to adopt a more long-term sustainable approach to fostering economics and commerce more generally, particularly for small and medium enterprises, I think we need to address this sort of capture of the domain by certain elites.
So when we talk about other factors, particularly when we talk about the political stability, when the country's economy was going through a very difficult phase, especially in the wake of the floods of summer 2022, also at that very particular point in time, there was a political instability prevalent at that time, which we see is not the case at this point in time. And also this IMF review mission here in Pakistan, earlier we see that there were appreciative comments on the part of Mr. Nathan Porter regarding the efforts the government authorities have taken here in Pakistan while navigating through a very narrow corridor, but keeping on track to the conditions that they've agreed with the IMF at that time. So the presence of a review mission and the hope of that release of the next tranche with more political stability, and also the date of elections announced by the Election Commission of Pakistan, how much these factors do you think have contributed to this particular trend at the Pakistan Stock Exchange?
I think quite a bit, actually. I think the government of the time must be appreciated for the political stability that they have sort of incubated in Pakistan, but I believe this is also going to be a short-term measure if we do not address the fundamental issue in our democracy. Come election time in 2 months, or whatever the time scale may be, we are going to continue to see rising levels of political polarization. We're going to see more and more hostility between political parties, and that obviously has to do a lot with the fact that political parties and their internal dynamics are such that they are responsible or accountable to certain power centers, which include big landlords, which include the civil bureaucracy, big industrialists, international financial institutions, the security apparatus, and so on and so forth. In order for political polarization to be addressed in a sustainable manner, we need to address these things. You know, we need to address the fact that
when you specifically talk about a kind of the rising temperature that is associated with the electoral activity itself, isn't it natural? Well, the kind of political instability that we had in the recent past was based on more of divisive politics. And politics of agitation and confrontation.
Oh, yes.
But when we talk about the rise of temperature when it comes to electoral politics near or before or after the elections, that pretty much happens to be a natural one.
Oh yes, for sure. We see rising levels of tension in the lead up to elections across the world. However, in Pakistan and in the developing world in general, we see the rise of authoritarianism, we see the rise of leaders that are fundamentally appealing to a certain...
So what's required? A charter of economy, a broader consensus among all the political stakeholders in the country to come onto a certain broader consensus in order to bring in those reforms which are actually required in order to steer the economy into a right direction. What's required with that to bring all the political stakeholders onto a certain broader consensus and formulating a charter of economy?
I think more important than a charter of economy is perhaps a charter of democracy 2.0, which outlines the rules of the game that each political party has to adhere to if they want to continue to participate in electoral cycles and political contestation more broadly. This will involve certain conditions that they have to meet, which could see things like the necessity of intra-party elections, for instance. Financial transparency in election campaigns is another important one. The fact that a lot of these political parties are sitting on a certain support base, such as in Sindh, and they don't really have to constantly reinvent themselves or appeal to rising necessities and needs and desires of their constituencies going forward in the future. I think all of these things have to come under a certain charter of democracy that each political party has to agree to in order to continue to participate in electoral cycles. And this is a process that could be spearheaded, if done right, by the Election Commission of Pakistan.
What about the continuity of policies when it comes to the Charter of Economy? As you have just described, we require a Charter of Economy 2.0, a Charter of Democracy, in fact. What about Charter of Economy and having a broader consensus about formulating strategies, implementing them with continuity, no matter which political party comes in power, but for the larger national interest?
Yes. The reason I say Charter of Democracy and not economy is because economic conditions are constantly evolving over time. And to rely on a textbook approach to resolving economic ills, I think is a mistaken strategy, and it will continue to be a mistaken strategy. The key point here should be to instill democratic norms, empower civil society, liberate unions and farmers associations and so on and so forth. And each of these can act as feedback mechanisms for governing elites to constantly be responsive to. And I think that is the way forward. We have to approach economics and politics in a manner that is appreciative of the fact that the citizenry is not a passive spectator, but a participant in society's affairs. And
right, Mr. Ali, when we talk about the conditions which have been met by, there was of course a narrow corridor for the authorities here in Pakistan, the kind of conditions which had been set by the IMF, tough negotiations at that time. Finally, there was an agreement of the standby agreement. Afterwards, what was at that particular moment required for the Pakistani authorities to keep itself on track and not burdening the masses at the same time to an extent that perhaps the people couldn't afford? Keeping that one also in check and also keeping on track to meet all those tough conditions. What were those prime steps the government authorities in Pakistan had to take after that agreement was reached?
Right. So before I comment on the economic issues, allow me to comment briefly on the politics, since we have been discussing the political stability. My view is that the political parties, existing political parties in Pakistan, have run their course, and unless there is a new political dynamism within the democratic institutions and within broader social dynamics, I do not expect a fundamental change in the political direction of the country. Which means that
I tend to differ a little bit. I just want you to expand on it a little further. When you say that the political parties in Pakistan have run their course, could you expand that one a little bit? Because what I understand from this is, let's talk about Britain. We have very old parties, the Tory party and the other one, which have continued over the centuries now.
So
what
do you mean? It's a good example. You see that although the political parties have not changed, but if you look at the British politics, there is a strong dynamism within how parties have changed their leadership over time. We just heard yesterday that Mr. David Cameron, who served Prime Minister for a number of years, would be now back as the Foreign Secretary.
There's been a lot of criticism on that particular thing.
But broadly,
choosing him.
But broadly, if you look at how the Tory party or the Labour Party have dynamism in internal election, and look at the fact that the members of the Parliament, when they are in the House of Commons, they have freedom to vote for their party or not vote for their party when particular legislations are brought to the Parliament, right? So these are fundamental structural differences which the politics, let's say in the US,
perhaps it was not easy at a time when the political scenario was evolving over time.
So these countries, which are, I think,
it takes some time for the things to settle down.
So that's why I think
that is perhaps the process of evolution. Coming back to economy.
Right, sure. I tend to come back on the economy, but of course we have to operate within the larger political cycle also. And reforms are extremely important, as my colleague Mr. Abbas was saying. On the economy, and you asked a very pertinent question about the conditions. Now, let me go back to the standby arrangement a few months back when Pakistan secured the SBA on the brink of a financial collapse or bankruptcy, right? And although some of us might have ironically hoped that this would not have happened, Pakistan might have been more serious about structural reforms, but anyways, we averted the disaster. It's a good news in that sense. And largely the government was expected to follow fiscal discipline, that is the budgetary targets which were determined in the financial year should not be compromised. It was also expected that the government intervention in the forex markets needs to be eliminated or reduced. Also, it was expected in the conditions that serious efforts on SOE reforms, serious efforts towards privatization needs to be undertaken. Also, power sector circular debt needs to be reduced, and any inefficiencies in the power sector need to be seriously addressed. So these are 4 or 5 key points which were the conditions to maintain or to remain on track in the IMF SBA. And I think to some degree the government is on the track, I would say. For instance, for the first time in many years, I'm seeing serious development on the SOEs reform, on privatization. Look at, they have finally appointed a financial advisor for PIDE restructuring, leading to hopefully privatization or at least unbundling or new governance structure. There have been movements also in other SOEs following the SOE reforms. So I see also very dynamic privatization minister who seemed to be laying some important groundwork, although the time span is very limited, and I do not expect them to do miracles in these 3 or 4 months, and it is not their mandate also. But good things are happening on that front. On the tax, I would have a mixed view. I think the tax, as far as if you just look at the tax collection number, yes, the government is keeping on track, and it seems the recent data suggests that it's not just import taxation as usual, it's also an increase in the local, like income tax and sales tax has improved. So it's a good news in that sense, but it's also on the back of not so good economy in terms of economic growth rate. Look at the investment is not coming in, right? We had a lot of hopes from SIFC. We didn't see much of. So these are the.
When you specifically talk about SIFC, it's quite in a very nascent time. It's just the start of it, right? So there is a long way to go. But the kind of potential that it offers, with the kind of attraction to foreign investors in key areas, it has already chalked out. Don't you think it has got potential? And when we talk about the economic indicators of this particular month, the foreign direct investment has gone up 15%.
Well, I mean, this is certainly good news. I have yet to see sort of the breakdown of the foreign direct investment, in which sectors it is coming. And I hope that in the long run, this attracts not only greater FDI, but also the local investment, which is as important as attracting FDI. And also, Tehami, what is important to also understand that what are the conditions and what are the sort of packages in which the FDI is coming. For instance, we had FDI coming in CPEC, right? So in 2013 to 2018, and significant FDI has flown into. But that FDI went into infrastructure. And that did not translate into
foreign direct investment is coming.
Need to understand the package.
You just mentioned CPEC. There was a 15% on account of some Chinese investment in CPEC related projects. Also, it is as per the document of the finance ministry.
No, this is the good
there
news.
was a 15% increase.
This is certainly good news.
When we take China-Pakistan economic corridor into account also.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So the foreign direct investment
but my point
keeps coming in.
Let me complete my point. My point is that if the FDI converts into a productive investment, into, let's say, job creation, into value addition activity within the businesses, within the private firms, where private firms are involved, then it will have long-term positive impact for the
naturally,
economy.
I just want to understand when we look forward to have more foreign direct investment. For example, let's talk about this particular 15% increase. in foreign direct investment when it comes to specifically to CPAC related projects. You mentioned that it came into infrastructure. Naturally, don't you think with it, job creation, employment creation is naturally associated?
It has happened already. I'm saying that we need to acknowledge the employment gains which CPAC investment has brought. But remember, there is also talk about CPAC 2, in which we had planned that industrial relocation would occur, business to business ventures would be signed up between Pakistan and China, and we will be more exports, like there will be more exports from Pakistan to China. Now, all of that needs significant enhancement in Pakistan's private sector capacity. That I am not seeing to happen, and we need to understand.
What's required for that?
So I think
what should be done in that
the incentive
aspect?
structure for the local investor needs to be seriously looked into, and there we need to talk about the tax environment, essentially, in my view, which has become a major, if not the only, deterrent for new investment and also for the existing investors in which they are not expanding investors. If a corporate firm in Pakistan is today is established on a corporate lines, and it is expected to give up almost 50% of its income to the government, what is there to run
where
the
does
profit?
that happen? 50%? Can you exactly quote
Yeah,
where
of course.
does that 50%?
So if you look at just income tax number, it is already crossed about 30%. If you look at the WWF tax, if you look at also the tax on large companies, there's another 5% tax. So if you add up all the numbers, the tax burden for especially large scale companies can go up to 50%. For smaller companies it is less, but there is that, we have hit that ceiling. So we need to see the problem in the investment structure.
Okay, so let's talk about in the perspective of the statement which has been given by, we generally have that very feeling, more taxes, more growth, more development. Now, it happens to be the backbone for any country's economy.
No,
that
it
is
doesn't.
what's
It doesn't work like that.
How does it actually work?
So it works like this way. So we have to, first of all, we have to see economic growth. We have to see, a government which is limited to its own core governance function and letting the business flow. Competition is there. Private sector is growing. More jobs are being created in the private sector. And only then they can expect to pay government through taxes, and then that can be reinvested in the development function. This notion that taxation itself leads to growth is, I'm afraid of, as a false notion. No country in the world has taxed its way to prosperity.
Revenue generation being the backbone of any country's economy. Dr. Moosvi, what's your understanding of the taxation, especially the kind of taxation system that we do already have here in Pakistan, how to widen it, how to gain maximum out of it, what is required for that? What about also the simplification of the tax system?
No, thank you so much. I would want to start off by slightly disagreeing with some of the things that Ali Salman Saab has said. I have a lot of respect for him. He's a senior of mine. However, on the issue of privatization, there seems to be this narrative that privatization is going to be the panacea for all of our ills as a country. There was the study conducted by the Asian Development Bank in 1988, which looked at various corporations, companies following their privatization in terms of their levels of efficiency. Out of 38, I want to read out some statistics. Out of 38 public manufacturing enterprises, they found that only 9 performed better in terms of efficiency post-privatization, while 16 performed worse. In the ghee sector, 2 performed better and 5 performed worse.
The reason being?
Just to finish this, in the rice sector, 2 performed better and 6 performed worse. And this is not to mention the various industries that were forced to shut down following privatization. And the reason for this is that in the final analysis, it's not whether it's privatization or publicly run enterprises. If you look at the example of PIDE, the best performing airlines across the world today are airlines such as Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, and so on. All of these are state-owned enterprises. And so ultimately it comes down to the manner in which these agencies, these entities are being run. their internal managerial processes, their internal incentive structures, HR procedures, key performance indicators, and so on and so forth. If you have those factors mapped out, if you have a certain established framework within which they are functioning internally, then you naturally lead. It naturally leads to positive outcomes. So I did want to emphasize that point before we moved on. I haven't even gone into the financial sector, which saw a lot of privatization, the telecommunications sector, and so on. A lot of mixed sort of results following privatization. I did want to challenge that notion.
So when you talk about this particular study that was conducted in 1988, does it hold any relevance even today, or the methodology it had followed at that time?
Of course, I think so, because at the end of the day, I think if you look at the total number of enterprises that have been privatized in Pakistan, it amounts to over 250. And the reason why we conducted these initiatives was on the advice of international financial institutions such as the IMF, which said that once you privatize these, you will ease the burden on your fiscal account position. And the governance also naturally improves, doesn't that? That is the claim, of course, but we do not seem to have seen that materialize following these privatization initiatives. The narrative from the IMF at that time, during the late 80s when our first structural adjustment program came in, was that this is going to ease your fiscal account position, this is going to reduce the inflation rates and so on and so forth, but none of that actually came to pass. So a lot of these policies that are prescribed by the IMF and other international financial institutions are based on a theoretical textbook approach that I think is misguided, is mistaken. Like Ali Salman mentioned at the outset here, these are emergency measures. They might ease your economic situation for the short run, but in order to move towards long-term sustainable growth, progress, prosperity, inclusive prosperity, I should say, development, you need to go towards structural reform of key domains, key institutions, key sectors, and so on and so forth. On the issue of fiscal policy, I think we are still far too reliant on indirect taxation on goods and services, the disproportionate burden of which falls on the most vulnerable segments of society. We need to expand the tax net, like you mentioned very correctly. Pakistan incurs losses of 2.7 trillion rupees every year.
If you kindly hold your thought over here regarding this taxation, let me go back to Mr. Ali Salman to take his view if he has to add something to the privatization sector as per the study which has been mentioned by Dr. Moosvi. Do you have anything to add to that or respond to the things?
Just quickly, I think I recognize that study was done, as you also said, that that was a time. And many of those technologies were outdated. So I'm not surprised that some of the firms which were privatized actually closed down. They had to close down because there was no business rationale for them. But probably we need a new study after, let's say, the wave of privatization which was carried from, let's say, 1992 to 2005. We had a series of privatization deals. And in passing, Dr. Moosvi mentioned about the telecom sector, which is considered a successful case, at least to many of us. Banking, broadly, I think in terms of the growth and in terms of the profit, it has performed better, but probably also on the indicator of the credit to the private sector, it has not done as that well. So there are these results which need to be looked into, but I'm broadly in favor of privatization, not necessarily for the efficiency argument, but for the argument that it reduces government expenditure. That is, for me, is very important.
If I can just respond to that very quickly. I think it's important to look at statistics when we talk about these things. So in the financial sector, the situation today, we have the 5 biggest banks accounting for 60% of deposits and making 80% of the profits. The narrative that was peddled during their privatization was that it is going to lead to financial inclusion. However, today in Pakistan, only 1 in 5 adults over the age of 18 actually own a bank account. So following privatization, a lot of the promises that were made, we didn't actually see come to pass. On the issue of PTCL, for instance, following privatization, PTCL actually laid off 30,000 of its workers, and its market value actually plummeted by 75%. Incurring losses of about USD 3 billion to the government of Pakistan. So I think it's important to look at the statistics, and because it helps establish clarity on these matters. Respectfully, of course, Salman Saab.
Regarding this particular example? of the
No, I think
stats which
these points are well established. As I said, look, some of these sectors in which there is no future for the, let's say, a line-based technology company like PTCL, then many of the employment, let's say, it has created would become redundant, and unfortunately that's true. So I am not going to deny that, and resultantly there will be some losses as a result of today. For instance, if you look at Pakistan Steel Mill, there used to be a time where we needed steel mill, but we have run steel mill for last 10 years, financially, without actually producing a single, ton of steel bar. We still have employees there. So there will be those losses, and tough decision needs to be taken. But it's a complex debate, and I think in terms of sectors in which we are operating, the answers would be different. But we all can agree that privatization should lead to a fair market competition in the sectors where there is business. In sectors where the SOEs are operating, let's say, without a business rationale, they may be converted into a government departments if there is a need for public service delivery. But if there is a business and there is private interest, whether locally or internationally, government should exit from those sectors. That's my view.
Right, Dr. Moosvi, as the question of redundancy, right? You already gave an example of one of the firms which was privatized, the kind of human resource which was laid off. Of course, they would have been laid off with some kind of compensation in return. When we talk about the redundancy or the human resource not being any more viable, and it's the need to bring in the new human resource on more modern lines, equipped with more modern skills. So, I mean, privatization, and that would naturally, if you bring in more skilled workers on modern lines, it will definitely also result into better governance into the thing which has been privatized. And naturally, why would somebody like to invest into an entity which was already in a loss, having the same old redundant practices?
No, for sure. I think it's important to understand that across the world we see a lot of cases in which publicly run enterprises are functioning very successfully. Immediately what comes to mind is the healthcare system in the United Kingdom, the NHS, which is purely state-run. It's one of the most dynamic, robust, and very effective healthcare systems across the world. We don't see the problems over there in the manner that we see in Pakistan here. And largely, I will emphasize again, this comes down to internal managerial processes. On the issue of privatization, I think there seems to be this narrative that it's a threefold approach: privatize, deregulate, and liberalize. This is associated with the rise of neoliberal ideology following the Washington Consensus of 1989. And in every country across the global south, the developing world, this threefold, three-pronged policy prescription was peddled, and particularly in countries such as Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, it led to dire results. It led to rising levels of inequality, rising levels of precarity. Workers, ordinary people who were reliant on their jobs for their livelihoods had a terrible time trying to make ends meet because of the losses in social protection programs, in the retreat of the government from domains such as the healthcare domain, the education domain, the housing domain, and so on and so forth. Singapore is a great example of very successfully run, publicly run housing. 85% of housing in Singapore is provided by the government. So I think this narrative that privatization is inevitably going to lead to efficiency and better outcomes from an economic point of view needs to be challenged a little bit. We need to move towards homegrown local solutions, and this is something that again PIDE is promoting quite extensively through its Rasta program, which incubates local research and proposes local research for local problems.
Okay, going back to the taxation, you were already giving your take on that.
Yes.
Please continue with that.
Yes, I want to read out another statistic. This is from the UNDP's report 2020. 2.7 trillion rupees are extracted from the Pakistani economy on an annual basis through preferential taxation, favorable prices, and access to certain spaces and networks. And I think when conversations on tax generation are happening, this very concerning fact and reality needs to be taken into account. There are certain sectors and domains of society that are left untaxed, that certain elites that are given a free pass, they're given special privileges and not taxed enough.
Okay, so what sectors are undertaxed?
I think the industrial sector
Not
comes
even
to mind.
taxed at all, and how should those be brought? What are those sectors and how should those be brought into the tax base?
So there are two facets to this. If you look at the industrial sector in particular, there is quite a lot of rent seeking within the industrial sector. There are a lot of big industrial tycoons are constantly leeching off of resources from the government of Pakistan. This is taxpayers' money through the avenues that I just mentioned. This needs to be stopped immediately. On the other hand, they need to be taxed more through corporate taxation, and we need to, as you said, rightfully, diversify our tax net. We need to move towards things like wealth taxation. We need to move towards land taxation, things like financial transactions taxation. We need to move towards, for instance, within our cities, parking fares for vehicles. We need to install toll gates for vehicles. When they pass through those, they get charged a certain fee. This is going to be very useful for our urban regeneration in particular, and also raise revenues for the government. And these are the ways in which we can diversify our tax net. We need to move away from this indirect taxation through goods and services, because this is unavoidable. Everybody has to pay it, and the lion's share always falls on the most vulnerable segments.
So when we talk about, the Prime Minister has also talked about formulating a comprehensive strategy for the FPR. He was briefed upon how this particular taxation system in Pakistan is going to be digitalized. How important is to digitalize this system? And do you think with its digitalization, it would be simplified at the same time and would be of more value to the government?
No, I think digitalization in any context is a useful thing, and I think we shouldn't be afraid of modernizing our systems of taxation or any other domain for that matter. But however, the elephant in the room is the fact
when
that
you digitalize, of course, you go and identify all the data that who is taxable and a way to get the maximum revenue out, right? So when you are bringing them into a tax system which is digitalized, I mean, the problems which you have already mentioned, don't you think with digitalization those problems would be largely overcome?
I think it would make the issue more transparent. But at the end of the day, when you want implementation, when you want execution of various kinds of policies, you need a certain level of political will.
Transparency is that what you focused on in your earlier take, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
that seems to be the prime concern as per your understanding.
I think transparency will make resolving the issue a little bit easier. However, in order to actually follow through and go and actually achieve the objectives that you want to achieve, you need to have political will. You need to be able to challenge entrenched power structures. You need to cede space. Ruling elites in Pakistan need to cede space to ordinary citizens and allow them a role in the decision-making processes that affect their lives. And that is how you're going to move towards a more vibrant and dynamic kind of economy as a whole. And of course, after the 1980s, we saw the decline of trade unions in particular. We need to look at trade unions, we need to liberate trade unions so that they can engage in collective bargaining and push for higher pay, higher benefits, perks, and so on and so forth. This is a very important point. This isn't a problem specific to Pakistan. We've seen it across the global south. Largely in response to pressure from international financial institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF, and so on.
Mr. Ali, I guess you have a very important point to make. Please go ahead.
No, I think I want to just offer a different sort of view on the taxation, because I think this is crucial for our economic system, and the tax paradigm which we have often talked about. Is a structure where the taxation, the rate of taxation needs to be brought down significantly. Now, no one is talking about bringing the rate down. Normally, the government, the IMF, everyone is talking about enforcement, and normally they are talking about higher tax collection, either by administrative measures or by increasing the tax rates on the existing.
So when you talk about bringing the rate of taxation down, so that is inversely proportional to the number of taxpayers.
So that is exactly the point.
For that you need to widen it.
So that is,
if you want to bring it, as per your understanding, if you need to, if you are supposed to bring it down, the tax rate, naturally you are supposed to have a bigger base to get the maximum.
Yeah, so but you can't wait for the bigger, so you get kind of a chicken and egg situation here. If we want to wait for the base to be expanded and then brought down the tax rate, it won't happen, because people respond to incentives.
Okay,
so we need to bring down the sales tax rate significantly, the income tax, the corporate tax, all tax rates needs to be brought down to a level where at least it becomes regionally competitive. So regionally we are very high in terms of tax rate, and I also disagree on this one point, whether the manufacturing sector, industrial sector needs to be taxed more. Actually, they are already paying about 78% of the income tax being paid in the country. It is the industrial sector. So we don't want to overtax them even more. We want to tax everyone equally, and I'm against any kind of tax exemptions. Definitely we agree here. No exemptions.
Tax everyone equally? What does that mean?
So regardless of your economic activity, your economic sector or business firm, the rate of the taxation should be the same. That is the equal taxation.
What about its relation with the dividend at the end of the day?
Well, you know, that is the decision of an investor. So we are not going there. From that fiscal point of view, if I were to design a fiscal policy, I will impose same tax rate on all, of course, beyond a threshold.
So, Dr. Moosvi, your last comments. First of all, do you agree bringing the tax rate down? And do you also understand if we bring the tax rate down, naturally we would have to widen the base?
I totally agree with that. I think we need to widen the tax base. I believe in progressive taxation. I believe those who earn more should be paying more. So I do disagree with Salman Sahab on that. But again, I will emphasize that we need to also broaden the base and include things like wealth taxes and land taxes, agricultural taxes, very important, financial transaction taxes and so on. But on the flip side of the equation, there is the expenditure side. We didn't get too much time to talk about that. We need to look at where our expenditures are going. The PSDP has a lot of brick and mortar projects. It has a lot of unjustifiable levels of perks and privileges for civil bureaucracies. It does have runaway, there is generally runaway non-combat, non-defense, non-development rather, expenditures.
So all of PSDP, by the way, has gone down 29.3% this year as compared to the last one.
Yes, and I think that's temporary, but I think it's a good initiative, and I think that should continue.
Dr. Abbas, Moosvi, Research Fellow, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Ali Salman, Executive Director of Policy Research, Institute of Market Economy, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.